11 p.m. Emergency repair call. Nathan Rivers dragged his beaten toolbox up 47 floors, each step reminding him why desperate single dads take midnight jobs that pay triple rates. The penthouse door opened to reveal Manhattan's ice queen herself, Sophia Sterling, CEO worth $50 billion, standing in a palace that felt colder than his broken-down truck outside. No broken appliances, no electrical failures, just suffocating silence, and a woman whose designer dress couldn't hide the loneliness bleeding from her eyes. She moved like smoke through her marble museum. $2 million, she whispered, voice fracturing the stillness. One night, just stay with me. Nathan's calloused fingers tightened around his toolbox handle. His wedding ring caught the city lights below. What he said next wasn't the answer she expected. It was something that shattered her untouchable world completely. Nathan set down his toolbox with deliberate slowness. His work boots echoed against marble that probably cost more than his annual rent. The penthouse stretched endlessly, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing Manhattan like a kingdom, furniture that belonged in magazines, art that screamed money. But no photographs, no personal touches, nothing that whispered home. Sophia Sterling stood frozen by those massive windows, her silhouette sharp against the city's glow. 31 years old, according to Forbes, youngest female CEO in the Fortune 500. Worth more than some small country's GDP. You have everything, Nathan said quietly, his voice cutting through the cathedral silence. But you don't have anything at all. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small music box. Cracked plastic, faded paint, obviously broken. I'm poor. My truck barely runs. My apartment's the size of your bathroom. But I have something you can't buy with $2 million. The music box sat in his palm like a wounded bird. I have a 7-year-old son who loves me for real. Not because I can provide for him, not because I'm successful, because I'm his dad. Sophia's perfectly manicured fingers pressed against the glass. Her reflection stared back. Beautiful, powerful, utterly alone. What makes you think I need love? The words came out harder than intended, but Nathan caught the tremor underneath. He'd heard that same false bravado in his own voice 3 years ago, when the social worker asked if he needed help raising Tyler alone. Pride wrapped around pain like armor that never quite fit right. This music box cost me $5 at a thrift store, Nathan continued, turning the broken toy over in his hands. It was the last gift I bought my wife before she died. Amy loved old things, said they had stories to tell. This one doesn't play anymore, but it's worth more to me than your entire penthouse. He looked directly at Sophia, seeing past the designer facade to something raw and hungry. Do you have anything like that? Anything that matters because of love, not price tags? The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither dared cross. Sophia's breath fogged the window as she leaned closer to the glass, as if she could disappear into the city lights below. When she finally turned, tears tracked mascara down her cheeks, the first imperfection Nathan had seen in her flawless presentation. I haven't cried in 12 years, she whispered. Not since my parents died and left me their company. I built this empire, crushed competitors, made more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. And for what? Nathan wanted to leave. Every instinct screamed danger. This woman could buy and sell his entire life without blinking. But something in her voice, that barely controlled fracture, reminded him of Tyler's nightmares after Amy's funeral. Sometimes broken people just needed someone to sit with them in the dark. For protection, he said gently. Money's the best armor there is, until it becomes a prison. Sophia laughed, but it sounded like glass breaking. Do you know what I did last birthday? I had my assistant order myself a cake, vanilla with chocolate frosting. I ate it alone in this exact spot, looking down at 8 million people who don't know I exist. She gestured at the glittering cityscape. I could disappear tomorrow, and the only people who'd notice would be my board of directors. They'd probably throw a party. Tyler made me a birthday card last month, Nathan said, surprising himself. He rarely talked about his son with strangers, but Sophia didn't feel like a stranger anymore. She felt like someone drowning in plain sight. Construction paper and crayon, drew a picture of us fixing a motorcycle together, which is funny because I can barely fix a bicycle. But he sees me as this amazing mechanic who can repair anything. The memory softened his voice. Kids don't lie about love. They just love until you give them a reason not to. Something shifted in Sophia's posture. She moved away from the window, padding barefoot across marble that probably cost more per square foot than Nathan made in a month. Up close, without the armor of distance and city lights, she looked younger. Vulnerable. Human. I don't remember the last time someone wanted to spend time with me without wanting something in return, she admitted. Business dinners, charity galas, board meetings, it's all transactions. Even my relationships were mergers. Nathan's phone buzzed. Text from Mrs. Patterson, his elderly neighbor who watched Tyler when emergency calls came in. Tyler's asleep. Sweet dreams to you both. The simple message hit him like a punch to the chest. Someone cared about his son. Someone checked on them because humans looked out for each other, not because money changed hands. I have to go, he said, pocketing the phone. Tyler wakes up if I'm not home by midnight. Bad dreams. Wait. Sophia's voice cracked like ice in spring. I'll pay you to stay. Name your price. 10 million, 20. I haven't talked to another human being, really talked, in months. Please. The desperation in her voice stripped away every pretense. This wasn't negotiation. This was begging. Nathan studied her face, seeing past wealth to the lonely child underneath. I won't take your money, he said finally. But I'll make you a deal. You want to know what love looks like? Come to Millbrook, Ohio. See how real people live. See what $2 million means to someone who's never had 2,000. He headed for the door, then paused. But you come as Sophie, not Sophia Sterling. You come as a person, not a checkbook. The elevator doors opened like a mouth ready to swallow him back into his real world of overdue bills and single parenthood. As the floors counted down, 46, 45, 44, Nathan wondered if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. Or maybe, just maybe, he'd planted a seed that could grow into something neither of them expected. 3 days later, a black sedan pulled up outside Nathan's rented duplex in Millbrook. The license plate read, Sterling. Through his kitchen window, Tyler pressed his nose against the glass like a puppy watching for visitors. Dad, there's a fancy lady getting out of a fancy car. Do we know any fancy ladies? Nathan's coffee mug nearly slipped from his hands. She'd actually come. Sophia Sterling, or Sophie, as she'd apparently decided to call herself, stood on his cracked sidewalk looking like an alien who'd landed on the wrong planet. Designer jeans that probably cost more than Nathan's monthly salary, perfectly styled hair, and an expression of barely controlled terror. She clutched a small overnight bag like a shield and stared at his weathered duplex as if it might collapse from her mere presence. Tyler burst through the front door before Nathan could stop him. Are you the fancy lady? Dad said you might visit, but I didn't believe him because fancy ladies don't usually come to our street unless they're lost or selling something we can't afford. His 7-year-old honesty hit the air like a verbal grenade. Nathan winced, but Sophie laughed. A real laugh, not the practiced smile she probably wore to board meetings. I'm Sophie, she said, crouching to Tyler's eye level. And yes, I suppose I am a fancy lady, but I'm hoping you and your dad can teach me how to be a regular person for a few days. Tyler cocked his head like a confused puppy, processing this request with the seriousness only children could muster. "That's easy," he declared. "Regular people eat cereal for dinner sometimes and watch cartoons in their pajamas." "Do you own pajamas?" The question caught Sophie off guard. Nathan watched her mentally inventory her wardrobe, probably filled with power suits and evening gowns, but pajamas? "I sleep in." She started, then stopped, clearly realizing that silk nightgowns worth more than most people's cars didn't qualify as pajamas in Tyler's world. "No," she admitted. "I don't think I own pajamas." "Then we need to get you some," Tyler announced, with the authority of someone who'd just solved world hunger. "Dad, can we take Sophie to Walmart? They have the best pajama selection in 3 counties, according to Mrs. Patterson." Nathan caught Sophie's slight wince at the mention of Walmart. When was the last time she'd been in a discount store? Had she ever been in one? The trip to Walmart became an anthropological expedition. Sophie pushed a squeaky shopping cart through fluorescent-lit aisles, staring at price tags like ancient hieroglyphs. Tyler served as tour guide, explaining the intricacies of generic brands versus name brands, the strategic importance of clearance end caps, and why the pharmacy section always smelled like old people. "This is where Dad buys my medicine when I have a fever," Tyler explained, pointing to the pharmacy counter. "Mrs. Chen is really nice and sometimes gives me stickers." Sophie watched Nathan compare prices on children's ibuprofen, mentally calculating that the $10 difference he was weighing could cover Tyler's lunch money for a week. She'd spent more than his monthly grocery budget on a single business lunch and never thought twice about it. The casual mathematics of poverty fascinated and horrified her in equal measure. In the clothing section, Tyler became a pajama consultant. "These ones have dinosaurs, but they're kind of babyish. These ones are plain, but they look comfortable. Oh, these ones have dogs on them and they're on sale." He held up a pair of flannel pajamas marked down to $12.99. Sophie stared at the price tag, then at Tyler's earnest face. She'd paid more for cocktails she didn't finish. "Those are perfect," she said, taking the pajamas from Tyler's hands. "You have excellent taste in sleepwear." Tyler beamed with pride, and Sophie felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Recognition, approval, mattering to someone for reasons that had nothing to do with net worth or market share. Back at the duplex, Sophie changed into her $13 pajamas while Nathan heated up leftover pizza for dinner. She emerged from the bathroom looking younger somehow, softer. The flannel made her seem approachable instead of untouchable. Tyler had already claimed the middle spot on their second-hand couch, patting the cushions for Sophie to join him. "Dad makes the best leftover pizza," he announced. "He puts it in the toaster oven so the cheese gets melty again." They ate dinner on TV trays while watching cartoons, something called Adventure Time, that made absolutely no sense to Sophie, but had Tyler giggling uncontrollably. She found herself laughing too, not at the show, but at Tyler's infectious joy. When was the last time she'd laughed without calculating the social benefits? When had amusement become another business strategy? "Sophie," Tyler said during a commercial break, pizza sauce decorating his chin like war paint. "Do you have kids?" The question landed like a punch to the solar plexus. Sophie's smile faltered, and Nathan caught the subtle shift in her expression. "No," she said quietly. "I never had time for children. Too busy building my company." Tyler nodded with the wisdom of someone who'd accepted adult explanations that didn't quite make sense. "Dad says grown-ups have to make hard choices sometimes, but maybe you could have kids when you're not so busy. Kids are pretty great. I'm obviously the best example, but there are other good ones too." His matter-of-fact delivery made both adults smile, despite the weight of the conversation. After Tyler went to bed, Sophie and Nathan sat on the front porch sharing a beer, something Sophie couldn't remember doing since college. The night air carried the scent of someone's barbecue and the distant sound of teenagers laughing in a parking lot. Normal sounds, human sounds. I have 37,000 employees, Sophie said suddenly. I know their productivity metrics, their sick leave usage, their performance ratings, but I don't know any of their names. Nathan sipped his beer, letting the confession settle between them. Tyler knows everyone on this street, he said finally. Mrs. Patterson makes him cookies. Mr. Rodriguez lets him help wash cars on Saturdays. The teenage girl next door practices piano, and Tyler requests songs through the window. He gestured at the quiet neighborhood. This is what $2 million means to people like us. It means Tyler could go to college without student loans. It means I could quit the night jobs and actually be present for bedtime stories. The weight of that reality hit Sophie like a freight train. $2 million. Pocket change in her world, life-changing money in theirs. She'd probably spent that much on office furniture last quarter without blinking. I offered you that money to prove a point, she admitted. To see if you were different from everyone else who wanted something from me. But you turned it down. I turned down being bought, Nathan corrected. There's a difference. Money without relationship is just transaction, and I've got a kid who needs to learn that his worth isn't measured by what he can provide for other people. The conviction in his voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. Besides, you weren't offering money. You were offering payment for services rendered. I'm not for sale. Sophie stared at the stars barely visible through the light pollution, thinking about the last time she'd looked up instead of at spreadsheets or stock reports. What if I told you I genuinely want to help? Not as a business transaction, but as... She struggled for the word. As a friend? The word hung in the air like something fragile and new. Nathan studied her profile in the porch light, seeing past the designer facade to someone learning how to be human. Then I'd say friendship isn't about what you can do for someone. It's about showing up, being present, caring about their Tuesday as much as their crisis. 2 weeks into Sophie's stay in Millbrook, she'd learned to make boxed macaroni and cheese, discovered that generic cereal tasted exactly like name brand, and mastered the art of coupon clipping. She'd also learned that Tyler had nightmares about losing his dad the way he'd lost his mum, that Nathan took on dangerous night jobs because they paid better, and that the community of people looking out for each other was worth more than any portfolio she'd ever managed. She was washing dishes. Actually washing dishes, not loading them into a machine worth more than most people's cars, when her phone buzzed with an emergency alert. Sterling Enterprises stock down 15% following CEO absence rumors. Her hand stilled in the soapy water. The business world had noticed her disappearance. Nathan found her staring at her phone on the front porch, her face pale in the morning light. How bad? He asked, settling beside her on the steps. Tyler was at school, giving them privacy for whatever crisis was unfolding in Sophie's other life. Bad, she said quietly. The board's calling emergency meetings. The media's speculating about hostile takeovers. I have about 48 hours before everything I built starts crumbling. So you go back, Nathan said simply. Fix whatever needs fixing. That's what leaders do. But his voice carried a note of resignation that Sophie caught immediately. She'd become fluent in the subtle languages of this house, Nathan's carefully controlled disappointment, Tyler's brave acceptance of adult decisions he couldn't control, the quiet strength that held this small family together. If I go back now, I'll never leave again, Sophie said, voicing the fear that had been growing in her chest like a tumor. The company will consume me. Board meetings and profit margins and strategic initiatives. I'll forget what Tyler's laugh sounds like. I'll forget that boxed macaroni and cheese tastes like contentment when you're eating it with people who matter. Nathan's phone rang before he could respond. The caller ID showed Tyler's school. Nathan's face went white as he answered. Mr. Rivers, this is Principal Morrison. Tyler's been in an accident on the playground. We've called an ambulance. The words hit like physical blows. Nathan was on his feet before Sophie could process what she'd heard. At the hospital, Tyler lay unconscious in a bed that made him look impossibly small. Concussion from a fall off the monkey bars. The doctor explained brain swelling, observation periods, insurance forms that Nathan couldn't afford to fill out. Sophie watched Nathan's hands shake as he tried to sign paperwork, watched him calculate medical bills against grocery money, watched a good father face every parent's worst nightmare while worrying about bankruptcy. Without a word, Sophie disappeared into the hallway. When she returned 20 minutes later, Nathan was holding Tyler's hand and whispering stories about motorcycle adventures they'd never take. "It's handled," she said quietly. "The bills, the specialists, whatever he needs. It's handled." Nathan's eyes filled with tears he couldn't afford to shed. "I can't let you. You're not letting me do anything." Sophie interrupted. "I'm choosing to help my friend's son. That's what friends do." For 3 days, Sophie never left the hospital. She learned to sleep in plastic chairs, to find edible food in vending machines, to hold Nathan's hands when the fear got too big for words. She called her assistant and cancelled board meetings, ignored frantic emails from shareholders, let her stock price plummet while she focused on Tyler's vital signs. On the 4th day, Tyler opened his eyes and asked for chocolate pudding. The relief in that sterile room felt like oxygen after drowning. Sophie found herself crying, ugly, grateful tears that had nothing to do with profit margins and everything to do with loving a 7-year-old boy who'd taught her that fancy ladies could learn to be regular people. But while Sophie was learning about love, her corporate world was imploding. Harrison Blake, chairman of Sterling's board of directors, arrived in Millbrook like a storm system. Silver-haired, sharp-suited, carrying the authority of old money and older power. He found Sophie in the hospital cafeteria, still wearing her $13 pajamas under Nathan's borrowed jacket. "This ends now?" Harrison said without preamble. "Sterling Enterprises has lost $12 billion in market cap while you've been playing house with these people. The board votes tomorrow on your removal as CEO. You have 12 hours to return to New York and salvage your career, or 30 years of building this company disappears." Sophie stared at her reflection in the cafeteria's fluorescent lights, seeing both versions of herself, the powerful CEO who could buy and sell companies, and the woman who'd learned to love boxed macaroni and cheese. "What if I choose them?" she asked quietly. "What if I choose love over profit margins?" Harrison's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "Then you lose everything. Your company, your fortune, your legacy. For what? A handyman and his son who'll forget you exist once the novelty wears off." His words cut like surgical instruments, precise and devastating. "You think this is real? You think they care about Sophia Sterling? Or do they care about your checkbook?" The question followed Sophie back to Tyler's room, where Nathan was reading Green Eggs and Ham in different voices, while Tyler giggled weakly. She watched them through the doorway. This father who worked 3 jobs to keep his son safe, this child who loved unconditionally despite loss and fear. Were they her friends, or her latest charity project? Nathan looked up and caught her watching. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Sophie forced a smile that felt like broken glass. "Just tired. Hospital lighting makes everyone look half dead." But Nathan's expression shifted, reading something in her face that she couldn't hide. "What happened? What aren't you telling me?" Before Sophie could answer, Tyler piped up from his bed. "Sophie, when I get out of here, can we make pancakes? The real kind with syrup and everything? Dad always burns them, but I bet you're good at pancakes." His innocent faith hit her like a physical blow. This child trusted her, loved her, believed she'd be there for pancake mornings and bedtime stories and all the small moments that made life worth living. "I have to go back," Sophie said, the words tearing from her throat like confession. My company. There's a crisis. I might be gone for a while. Tyler's face fell, but he nodded with the practiced acceptance of a child who'd learned that adults left. Will you come back? He asked. After you fix your company? Sophie's throat closed around words she couldn't say, promises she couldn't make, lies that would be kinder than truth. I'll try, she whispered, hating herself for the inadequacy of the answer. Nathan's expression hardened, recognizing the sound of goodbye disguised as hope. That night, Sophie packed her single overnight bag while Nathan put Tyler to bed. She could hear them through the thin walls, Tyler asking if Sophie was leaving forever, Nathan's careful non-answers, the quiet negotiation of a father protecting his son from another abandonment. When Nathan emerged from Tyler's room, his face was stone. So this is how it ends, he said, not quite a question. Crisis calls, and the real world wins. Sophie clutched her bag like armor, unable to meet his eyes. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. 30,000 jobs depend on my decisions. I can't be selfish. Selfish. Nathan's voice rose, then dropped as he remembered Tyler sleeping nearby. You think choosing love is selfish? You think being present for people who care about you is selfish? He moved closer, and Sophie could see the hurt burning behind his anger. Or maybe Harrison was right. Maybe this was all just novelty for you, slumming it with the poor folks until real life called you home. The accusation hit like a slap. Sophie's carefully constructed composure cracked, revealing the fear underneath. That's not fair. You know that's not who I am. But even as she said it, doubt crept in. Was this real, or was she just playing dress-up in someone else's life? Do I? Nathan asked quietly. Because the woman I thought I knew wouldn't abandon a 7-year-old who loves her. The woman I thought I knew would fight for what matters instead of running back to a boardroom full of people who see her as a profit center. Sophie's tears came then, ugly and honest. I don't know how to choose, she sobbed. I've spent 15 years building this company. It's everything I am. If I lose it, what's left? Nathan's expression softened, seeing past her fear to the terrified child beneath. You'd still be the woman who makes Tyler laugh. You'd still be the person who learned to clip coupons and wash dishes and sleep in plastic chairs because someone you loved needed you there. But fear was stronger than love, and Sophie left before dawn. She drove back to Manhattan in her black sedan, watching Millbrook disappear in her rearview mirror like a dream dissolving at sunrise. By the time she reached her penthouse, Harrison was waiting with emergency board meeting agendas and crisis management strategies. The next 18 months blurred together in a haze of hostile takeover defenses and market recovery initiatives. Sophie saved Sterling Enterprises, restored shareholder confidence, and emerged stronger than ever. Forbes put her on their cover with the headline, Ice Queen's Revenge. She was profiled as the CEO who'd overcome a mysterious sabbatical to rebuild her empire bigger than before. But success tasted like ashes. Sophie tried to fill the emptiness with work, with achievements, with the hollow praise of people who valued her net worth over her humanity. She bought a bigger penthouse, hired more assistants, and built walls so high that loneliness became her only companion. She never called Nathan, never checked on Tyler. The guilt was too massive, the shame too complete. How could she explain that she'd chosen money over love? How could she justify abandoning a child who'd trusted her with pancake mornings and bedtime stories? Then, on a Tuesday that felt like every other Tuesday, Sophie collapsed in her office. Exhaustion, the doctors said. Severe dehydration and malnutrition brought on by working 18-hour days and forgetting to eat. As she lay in her private hospital room, surrounded by flowers from business associates and cards from employees she'd never met, Sophie realized she was dying from the inside out. Her assistant brought her a stack of get-well cards from Sterling employees. Buried in the corporate sympathy was a single piece of construction paper, folded carefully and addressed to Sophie in crayon. Tyler's handwriting, older now, but still recognizably his. Dear Sophie, Dad says you're sick. I'm sorry you're sick. I made you a card because cards make people feel better. I hope you get well soon. I still remember how to make pancakes. Love, Tyler. P.S. Dad misses you too, but he won't say so. Sophie held that construction paper card against her chest and wept for everything she'd lost. The next morning, she called her assistant and did something that sent shockwaves through the financial world. She resigned as CEO of Sterling Enterprises. 3 weeks later, a woman with shorter hair and clothes from Target knocked on Nathan's door in Millbrook. Tyler opened it, stared for a long moment, then launched himself into her arms with a force that nearly knocked her over. Sophie, you came back. Dad said you might never come back, but I knew you would because you promised pancakes. Nathan appeared in the doorway, older and more weathered than Sophie remembered. His expression was carefully neutral, protecting himself and Tyler from another potential abandonment. Tyler, go wash your hands for dinner, he said quietly. Tyler reluctantly released Sophie, but bounced on his toes with excitement. Sophie, are you staying for dinner? Dad made spaghetti, but he's not very good at it. You could help. After Tyler disappeared into the house, Nathan and Sophie stood on the front porch, where they'd shared beer and honesty 18 months earlier. So, Nathan said finally, the prodigal CEO returns. His voice carried hurt like a scar that hadn't quite healed. Sophie nodded, accepting the judgment. I resigned, sold all my shares, used the money to create a foundation for single parents who need help with medical bills. Nathan's eyebrows rose slightly. And I bought a small house 2 streets over. I'm opening a business, financial consulting for small companies and families, helping people manage money instead of just making it. Sophie's voice strengthened as she spoke. I want to be here, Nathan, for Tyler's pancake mornings and homework help and school plays, for whatever comes next. What about the next crisis? Nathan asked. The next board meeting that needs you? The next time choosing us feels like choosing less? The questions hung between them like tests Sophie hadn't studied for. There won't be a next time, she said simply. I learned something in that hospital room. Success without people to share it with isn't success. It's just expensive loneliness. Tyler's voice carried from the kitchen. Dad, Sophie, the spaghetti's getting cold and it wasn't very good when it was hot. Nathan's mouth twitched toward a smile despite his caution. He's right about the spaghetti, he admitted. I never quite mastered Italian cuisine. Good thing I learned to cook, Sophie said. Turns out YouTube has tutorials for everything, including how former CEOs can make decent marinara sauce. The tentative hope in Nathan's expression was like sunrise after the longest night. You really stayed, he said wonderingly. You chose us. I chose love, Sophie corrected. Same thing, but more accurate. They walked into the house together, toward the sound of Tyler setting the table and the smell of imperfect spaghetti and the possibility of ordinary happiness. 2 years later, on a Tuesday that felt different from every other Tuesday because it was perfect in its ordinariness, Sophie was closing up Riverside Financial Consulting, the small office she shared with Nathan, who'd discovered a talent for helping people repair both their finances and their broken appliances. Tyler, now 10 and showing signs of inheriting his father's mechanical aptitude, was building something complicated with Legos in the corner. The music box, Amy's music box that Nathan had finally allowed Sophie to repair, sat on the windowsill, playing La Vie en Rose in the fading afternoon light. The song ended, leaving only the comfortable sounds of a life being lived. Tyler humming as he worked, Nathan organizing tools with methodical precision, Sophie reconciling the day's accounts. No one spoke, but the silence was full rather than empty, present rather than hollow. Tyler looked up from his Legos. "Sophie, do you ever miss being super rich?" The question was asked with the casual directness of a child who'd grown up around adult honesty. Sophie considered the question seriously, as she'd learned to do with Tyler's inquiries. "Sometimes I miss the security," she said finally. "But I don't miss being alone." "Good," Tyler announced with satisfaction. "Because Dad makes terrible pancakes, and someone needs to make good ones in this family." Nathan laughed, a sound that had become more frequent over the past 2 years. "My pancakes aren't that bad," he protested. "They're just textually interesting." "They're hockey pucks with syrup," Sophie said fondly. "But I love you anyway." The words slipped out naturally, worn smooth by daily use. Not declarations anymore, just facts as basic as breathing. Nathan's smile was answer enough. As the sun set over Millbrook, painting their small office in golden light, Sophie closed the account books and Nathan packed up his tools. Tyler carefully disassembled his Lego creation, something he did every evening so he could build something new tomorrow. The music box wound down, its final notes fading into the comfortable quiet of a day well lived. They walked home together, 3 people who'd learned that the most valuable things in life couldn't be bought, only built. One conversation, one choice, one act of love at a time. Grace stopped in front of a vintage Mustang and began explaining its restoration challenges to interested adults with confident expertise. Tom and Isabella watched their daughter with shared pride. "She's going to be trouble when she gets older," Isabella observed with fond amusement. "Smart, confident, and completely unimpressed by authority figures." Tom laughed, pulling Isabella closer. "She gets that from both of us," he said. "God help any boy who tries to take advantage of her." The afternoon stretched long and golden, filled with simple pleasures that had once seemed impossible to all 3 of them. As the car show wound down, the Carter-Montgomery family began packing up their display. Grace helped fold promotional materials while humming contentedly, completely secure in her place between the 2 adults who had learned to love each other partly through their shared devotion to her. Tom and Isabella worked together with efficient teamwork, their movements coordinated and purposeful. The Shelby Cobra sat silent in the center of their booth, no longer a symbol of challenge or conflict but of transformation and new beginnings. "Good day?" Tom asked as they drove home, though the answer was obvious in the satisfied smiles they all wore. "The best," Isabella replied, then paused. "Actually, that's not true. Every day with you and Grace keeps getting better than the last one. I never thought I'd have this kind of life." Grace looked up from the back seat, drowsy but content. "What kind of life?" Tom asked. Isabella's smile was soft and genuine, completely free of corporate masks. "The kind where someone loves you not because of what you can do for them, but because of who you are when you're not trying to be anyone special. Are we home?" Grace asked as they pulled into their driveway. "We're home," Tom confirmed, and the word carried more weight than simple geography. Home was this house they had chosen together, this family they had built from the wreckage of their separate disasters, this life they had created by choosing each other again and again. Grace climbed into the front seat to hug both adults simultaneously. "I love our family," she announced with simple certainty. "Even when it's weird and complicated and different from other people's families?" Isabella laughed, the sound lighter than anything from her corporate days. "Especially when it's weird and complicated and different," she corrected gently. Those are the best kinds of families. As they settled into their evening routine, Tom found himself thinking about the pocket watch in his jacket and the woman whose memory it carried. Natalie would have loved Isabella. He realized. She would have appreciated Isabella's fierce protection of Grace and her dedication to rebuilding what had been broken. Most of all, she would have been grateful that Tom had found someone who understood that love wasn't about replacing what was lost, but about making room for new happiness alongside cherished memories. The watch ticked steadily in his pocket, no longer a weight but a blessing, connecting past love with present joy. The story that had begun with a cruel challenge at a car show had evolved into something none of them could have imagined, a family built on second chances, hard-won trust, and the radical decision to choose love over fear again and again. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight they were exactly where they belonged, surrounded by the people who mattered most and wrapped in the quiet certainty that some promises were worth keeping forever. In the end, Isabella had kept her word in ways she never could have intended, and Tom had proven that some men were worth betting everything on, even when the odds seemed impossible. Tyler had been accepted to several excellent colleges, ultimately choosing a program that would allow him to study both psychology and education. His plan was to return to the academy after graduation, bringing formal training to complement the intuitive understanding he'd developed through his work with privileged teenagers. "I want to understand the science behind what we're doing," Tyler explained to Catherine as he prepared for his freshman year. "Why some kids can be reached and others can't. What makes the difference between entitlement and confidence. How families can use wealth responsibly instead of destructively." Catherine looked at him with wonder, remembering the angry 16-year-old who'd confronted her about her deception just 2 years earlier. Tyler had found his calling in work that emerged directly from their unlikely friendship, creating a career path that honored both his natural empathy and his hard-won understanding of privilege and its discontents. Rob had returned to education in a way he'd never imagined, running a school that challenged students not with academic rigor but with moral complexity. The academy had become his masterpiece, a place where teaching meant more than transferring information. It meant transforming character. On a warm autumn evening, the three of them sat in Catherine's backyard, reviewing applications from families seeking spots in the academy's next session. The demand had grown beyond their capacity, forcing them to develop waiting lists and selection criteria that prioritized the students most in need of intervention. "Look at this one," Tyler said, reading from an application. 17-year-old who crashed his third Ferrari and told the judge that traffic laws don't apply to people with trust funds. "Classic case," Rob agreed. "Parents probably want us to fix him without actually changing anything about their family dynamics." Catherine studied the file, seeing echoes of her own parenting mistakes in the family's description of their son's behavior. "We'll take him, but only if the parents agree to counseling too. The kids can't maintain changes if they're returning to the same toxic environment." This had become their standard approach, recognizing that privilege poisoning was a family disease that required systemic intervention. Parents often resisted this requirement, preferring to see their children's problems as individual failings rather than symptoms of dysfunctional family cultures. The academy's most powerful tool had proven to be its location in Rob and Tyler's neighborhood. Wealthy students found themselves interacting daily with working-class families, learning that intelligence, kindness, and dignity weren't correlated with bank accounts. These interactions, carefully facilitated by Tyler and other peer mentors, shattered assumptions that years of privilege had reinforced. "The best moment," Tyler told Catherine, "is when they realize that my neighbors aren't projects to be pitied or problems to be solved. They're just people living their lives with as much complexity and purpose as anyone else." 2 years after the academy's founding, Catherine received a letter that made her cry for hours. It was from Emma's former best friend, Clara, whose parents had enrolled her in the program after she'd been expelled from prep school for bullying scholarship students. "I know Emma would want me to tell you something," Clara wrote. "She used to talk about how scared she was of disappointing you, how she felt like she had to be perfect because of who your family was. She knew the things you taught her about being better than other people were wrong, but she didn't know how to tell you. I think this academy would have saved her, and I know it saved me." Catherine shared the letter with Rob and Tyler, finally understanding that Emma's death hadn't been just about drunk driving or reckless behavior. It had been about a young woman trapped by expectations and privileges she'd never asked for, unable to find a way to be human in a world that demanded she be superhuman. She was trying to tell me, Catherine realized. All those times she pushed boundaries or acted out, she was trying to show me that the person I was raising her to be wasn't who she wanted to become. The Academy's success had attracted national attention, leading to documentary coverage and speaking engagements that Catherine approached with careful consideration. She was willing to share their story, but only in ways that honored Emma's memory while protecting the privacy of the students they served. Tyler found himself in demand as a speaker at conferences about youth development and class consciousness. His perspective as someone who'd bridged different worlds made him uniquely qualified to discuss both the damage that privilege could cause and the possibility of healing it through authentic human connection. The Real Life Learning Academy's 3rd anniversary was marked not by a community celebration, but by a quiet ceremony at Emma's grave. Catherine, Rob, and Tyler stood together beside the headstone, surrounded by letters from Academy graduates who'd gone on to use their privileges responsibly. "We did it," Catherine said quietly, addressing her daughter's memory. "We found a way to break the cycle. We're teaching other kids what I should have taught you. That being special means using your gifts to lift others up, not to separate yourself from them." Tyler placed flowers on Emma's grave, roses that he'd grown himself in the Academy's garden. "She would have loved the Academy," he told Catherine. "She would have been an amazing peer mentor." Rob watched this exchange with the satisfaction of an educator who'd witnessed profound transformation. The Academy had become more than a program. It was a living testament to the possibility of redemption and the power of education to heal intergenerational wounds. As they walked back to their cars, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A fence repair that had seemed like simple neighborly kindness had evolved into work that was literally saving lives, preventing other families from experiencing the devastation she'd endured. "What's next?" Tyler asked, thinking about his upcoming college graduation and return to the Academy as a full-time staff member. "We scale up," Catherine replied. "Open academies in other cities, train other educators in our methods, create a network of programs that can address privilege poisoning wherever it occurs. And we keep fixing fences," Rob added with a smile, "because sometimes the smallest acts of service lead to the biggest transformations." The fence between their properties still stood, weathered but solid, a reminder that good boundaries could create connection rather than separation. But now it also served as part of the Academy's campus, where privileged teenagers learned to maintain and repair things with their own hands, discovering dignity in labor and satisfaction in honest work. Catherine's transformation from entitled socialite to dedicated educator had taken 3 years, but Tyler understood that the real timeline was measured not in calendar months, but in lives changed. Each Academy graduate who returned to their wealthy family with new values and perspectives created ripple effects that would influence future generations. Emma's death had shattered Catherine's understanding of everything she'd believed about parenting and privilege, but from that devastation had grown something beautiful and lasting, a place where other parents' children could learn the lessons Emma had died trying to teach her mother. The Academy was Emma's legacy, proof that even the most tragic losses could be transformed into sources of healing and hope. "Then yes," he said to Sophia, Let's see how big this thing can grow. As they prepared to leave the art center, David took one last look around the space that had become the physical embodiment of his father's legacy. Students' artwork covered the walls, scholarship announcements filled a bulletin board near the entrance, and the faint scent of paint and possibility hung in the air like incense in a cathedral. Outside, the bronze plaque caught the late afternoon sunlight, casting shadows that made the engraved words seem to dance. Robert Matthews Art Center, dedicated to the belief that every person has something beautiful to offer the world. Emma skipped ahead toward the car, clutching her framed drawing and chattering about the mural techniques she'd learned. Sophia walked beside David in comfortable silence, both of them processing the magnitude of what they'd built together. "Do you think he knows?" Sophia asked as they reached the parking lot. "Somehow, do you think your father knows what grew from those art lessons he gave me?" David considered the question seriously, watching his daughter dance around the car with the boundless energy of a completely healthy child. "Dad used to say that love never really dies. It just finds new ways to express itself. Looking at Emma, looking at what we've created together, looking at all those kids in there discovering they have gifts worth sharing." He paused, feeling the truth of it settle into his bones. "Yeah, I think he knows, and I think he's proud of all of us." The drive home took them through the heart of their small city, past the community bank where this entire journey had begun. David glanced at the building as they passed, remembering the desperate man who'd sat in that vinyl chair just 7 months ago, clutching medical bills and facing impossible choices. That man had been so focused on what he couldn't provide for his daughter that he'd nearly missed the most important lesson his father had tried to teach him. That accepting help isn't a sign of weakness. It's a recognition of the interconnectedness that makes meaningful life possible. "Daddy," Emma said from the back seat, breaking into his thoughts. "When I grow up, I want to help run the foundation. Is that okay?" "More than okay," David replied, catching her eyes in the rearview mirror. "But you don't have to decide that now. You have lots of time to figure out what you want to be." "I already know," Emma said with the matter-of-fact certainty that only children can muster. "I want to be like Grandpa Robert. I want to help people see how beautiful they are." And there it was. David realized. The true measure of his father's success. The ultimate validation of every choice Robert Matthews had made during his 30 years of teaching. Not the galleries or foundations or bronze plaques, but the simple desire of a 9-year-old girl to continue the work of helping people recognize their own worth. As they pulled into their driveway, David felt a profound sense of completion, as if the circle that had begun with his father's kindness to a struggling teenager had finally found its way home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to expand the foundation's reach, new chances to honor Robert's memory through action rather than words. But tonight, as Emma hung her grandfather's drawing in the place of honor above their fireplace, and Sophia joined them for a simple dinner of homemade soup and store-bought bread, David Matthews understood that he was living inside his father's greatest masterpiece, a life dedicated to the radical proposition that everyone deserves to be seen, valued, and given the chance to flourish. The fluorescent lights of Riverside Community Bank seemed less harsh now when David visited to make the foundation's quarterly deposits. The loan officer who'd rejected his application 7 months earlier always greeted him with genuine warmth. Having watched the local news coverage of the art center's opening and the foundation's expanding work. Hard to believe it all started in this lobby," she'd remarked during his last visit, gesturing toward the spot where he'd first encountered Sophia Smith. "Best rejection I ever received," David had replied, and meant it completely. Because sometimes the word no is just the universe's way of pointing you toward a much bigger yes, one that includes not just your own dreams, but the dreams of everyone whose life you're meant to touch along the way. The children had adapted to their parents' partnership, with the resilience that made adults envious and hopeful in equal measure. Grace and Noah had become genuine friends, bonding over their shared experience of having parents who built things and their mutual pride in being part of a story that had ended well despite its difficult beginning. They'd helped design elements of the playground at the new Oakland schools, insisting on features that would be both fun and safe, and their input had reminded the adults that the ultimate purpose of construction was to create spaces where life could flourish. On the anniversary of the Riverside earthquake, Ethan and Alexandra had stood together at the site where the old school had once stood, now marked by a memorial garden honoring the resilience of the community that had survived the disaster. The inscription on the central monument read simply, "In memory of lessons learned and lives protected." And both of them understood that their own relationship had become part of that larger story of growth through adversity. Grace and Noah had placed flowers at the memorial, their easy friendship serving as proof that even the most complicated adult conflicts could be resolved when people chose love over pride. The question Grace had asked in the hospital waiting room, "Did you know this was going to happen?" had evolved from an innocent inquiry into something deeper and more challenging. Ethan had finally answered her honestly, explaining that he'd been worried about the building's safety, but hadn't been able to convince the grown-ups to listen to his concerns. Grace had processed this information with the directness that children brought to complex moral questions, concluding that sometimes adults made mistakes, but that what mattered most was learning to do better next time. Her simple wisdom had become a guiding principle for the new company, where every decision was evaluated not just for its immediate benefits, but for its long-term consequences on the people who would live and work in the buildings they created. As Ethan watched the sun set over San Francisco Bay from the office he now shared with Alexandra, he reflected on the journey that had brought them from adversaries to partners, from a professional disagreement that had cost him his career, to a collaboration that had given both of them a deeper sense of purpose. The city's skyline was dotted with buildings he'd helped design over the years, each one representing someone's vision of a better future made manifest in steel and concrete. But the structure he was most proud of wasn't visible from his office window. It was the trust he and Alexandra had rebuilt between them, the friendship their children had forged despite their parents' complicated history, and the commitment they'd made to ensure that integrity would never again be treated as a luxury in their professional lives. The phone on his desk buzzed with a text message from Noah, asking if Grace could come over for dinner and help with a science project about earthquake-resistant building design. Ethan smiled as he typed back his agreement, then looked across the office at Alexandra, who was reviewing plans for their latest project with the kind of intense focus that had once intimidated him. Now he recognized it as the expression of someone who understood that getting the details right could mean the difference between safety and catastrophe, between protecting families and destroying them. She looked up and caught him watching her, and her smile carried the warmth of someone who'd learned that being right wasn't nearly as important as being trusted. "Some people think integrity is a luxury," he'd said on that terrible day when everything changed. But time had proven that integrity was actually the foundation upon which everything worthwhile was built, and sometimes the most expensive choices turned out to be the ones that created the most value in the end. Grace and Noah's laughter drifted up from the street below, where they were playing in the small park that had been built to replace the demolished elementary school, and Ethan knew that every difficult decision he'd made had been worth it to hear that sound of children who felt safe enough to play without fear. In the growing dusk of a Millbrook evening, walking toward a future that held promise instead of just survival, Tom understood that some stories don't end with loss, but begin with it, using grief as a foundation for joy that runs deeper because it acknowledges the cost of loving fully. Grace's laughter echoed off the cemetery walls like music, and Maggie's hand in his felt like coming home to a place he'd never known existed. Anna's gift to them hadn't been a replacement for what they'd lost, but an expansion of what they'd thought possible. Love that multiplied instead of diminished, hope that grew stronger because it had been tested by the worst life could offer. The paint box sat safely in Grace's backpack, no longer a relic of the past, but a tool for creating futures Anna could only have dreamed of. Colors mixed with intention and applied with the confidence that comes from understanding that beauty is not diminished by sadness but made more precious because of it. The last visitors departed as darkness settled over the city, leaving the gallery space peaceful and warm in the glow of carefully positioned lighting that accommodated various sensory processing needs. Ruby had fallen asleep curled up next to her latest color study, while Jasper continued working on mathematical calculations for their next collaborative project. Zoe was reading quietly in a corner, occasionally looking up to observe the comfortable domesticity of their unconventional family gathering. Helena began the gentle process of transitioning the children toward home and bedtime routines, her movements carrying the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to create structure without rigidity, accommodation without chaos. Benjamin gathered art supplies and turned off equipment, his hands moving through familiar patterns that had become meditative rather than merely functional. As they prepared to leave the gallery space that had become the visible symbol of their commitment to honoring neurodivergent gifts, Benjamin paused to look once more at the children's collaborative installation. The piece seemed to pulse with its own internal light, geometric patterns and flowing colors, creating a visual representation of minds working together in harmony rather than competition. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: funding applications and research collaborations, therapeutic sessions with children whose gifts hadn't yet been recognized, conversations with educators and parents who were beginning to understand that different didn't necessarily mean deficient. But tonight, surrounded by the quiet evidence of healing and creativity and love that had emerged from their willingness to risk authentic connection, Benjamin Mitchell felt the deep satisfaction of someone who'd finally learned to stop hiding from his own gifts and the people who needed them most. The drive home through the quiet city streets was filled with the comfortable silence of a family that had learned to communicate through presence as much as words, their different ways of processing and expressing emotion woven together into something resilient and beautiful and entirely their own. And in the peaceful breathing of children who finally felt safe enough to sleep deeply, Benjamin could hear the echo of Luna's voice, reminding him that the most important art was always the kind that helped other people remember they weren't alone in the world.